What's up, Bug? Doug with D&E in the garage. Today I am going to show you how to take that horrifying rat's nest that I know you have underneath your hood right now of discombobbled, mismatched, missized wiring for those precious LED light bars and show you how to turn it into something like this with split tubing, properly heat shrunk wiring joints, everything labeled, fuses, all the same size wire. This video is going to be on how to make a proper DIY light harness or any other accessories. All right, friends, here's what you're going to need for this project. First and foremost, you're going to need something to cut stripped wire and also crimp the connectors. Now that could be accomplished with something as easy as a needle nose pliers. They make some pliers that are specially made for stripping wire and then have this little guy up here for crimping, but personally I like the all-in-one tool. Cut the wire right here, strip the wire right here, crimp your connectors right there. I find that's easiest to use. After, you're going to need either a lighter or a heat gun, some electrical tape. I like to use some masking tape, but anything you can use to mark the wires with. Probably going to want a Sharpie. You're going to need, obviously, a relay and a switch for the system. This system that I'm building today is going to be based on a indicator light switch, you know, the 3 power accessory ground, but you could also do it with a single post, single throw interrupter switch. You're going to need male-female blade connectors. I like to use the fully shielded ones for anything in the engine bay, and then I'll use the cheaper non-shielded ones for anything inside the cab. You're going to want to get a fuse holder. Instead of just wiring a fuse in all janky, these will keep your fuses waterproof, and it also makes it easy to identify them and change them if they go bad. You're going to want heat shrink. Now, this is not the most economical way to buy heat shrink. They sell it in rolls or long pieces. I couldn't find that when I was shopping today. So I got the little pieces. You're going to want to make sure you get the right heat shrink for the right size wire you are using. I've gotten the wrong size before thinking it would work, and it just doesn't. This stuff right here is the key to making this harness last long. You're going to want to get some split flex tubing. This is what's going to finish up and really finalize your harness at the end and really give it that extra added layer of neat and completeness. Then obviously you're going to need wire. I'm going to get by with just 2 colors. You could use more, you could use only one. It's totally up to you. For our purposes today, I'm going to be using 2 colors. And obviously the whole point of creating your own harness is to have it be custom built to your vehicle. So what you want to do is make a harness that isn't going to leave you with any extra wire, but has enough wire for you to run the lines discreetly to all the areas you're going to need to go to. What you're going to need to do is figure out the distance from your battery to the port that every vehicle has that goes into the cab. All right, it's usually right in front of where the driver sits on the firewall. Now here's the thing, I'm not actually making this harness for this vehicle. This harness is going to be a thank you gift for Eric for when I did the hitch. I welded up the hitch on the front of this Jeep. He went above and beyond, man. Gave up 2 full days of his weekend, dragged his welding setup all over the place. So to say thank you, his his Grand Cherokee, the wiring's a bit of a rat's nest. So we're doing this as a thank you to Eric. So I'm going to leave a little bit of extra. I'm going to add about 10% to my measurement so he has some leeway. All right, but what you're going to want to do, obviously if your battery's here, your positive terminal, you're going to need to figure out how far it is to go up to this firewall and then how far it is to go across the firewall over to that port. So on this Jeep, let's call that 22 inches. And then from this point, the port's right about where the brake booster is. That's about 40 inches. So 62 inches of wire will get us from here up and over. All right, so we're gonna write that down. We got our little wooden notebook here. From the battery to the port is 62 inches. Now, you're gonna wanna figure out how much you need to go from the port back here to the front of the vehicle and to your lights. You're gonna wanna leave some leeway here. So from the port, from the firewall to the front of the engine here is, let's call it 42 inches. Let's figure we need at least another foot to go across and get to the lights. So we're at 42, call it 54. So from the firewall to the grill, what'd I say, 54 inches. All right, now we got to go inside the Jeep. This is where it gets a little bit tricky. All right, so the port is somewhere back up here underneath your firewall. You need to figure out how much wire it's going to take to get from that port to wherever you want to put the switch. Now, this is where your measurements could be all over the place. Maybe you're going to put a switch right here, and then you need, you know, maybe 2 feet. Maybe you want the switch over there in your center console somewhere. If that's the case, you may need 4 feet. I'm going to do about 4 feet on ours because I don't know where Eric's going to want to put the switch. I'm just going to leave extra. But if you want to cut down on the amount of wire you're using and also have your vehicle be nice and clean, no extra wire hanging around, you could get real specific with measuring this out. Alrighty, now that port that I keep talking about, it's going to be on your firewall somewhere, usually right around the brake booster. If you're lucky, it's going to be in the open out here somewhere. I'm less lucky. Mine's right back here between this charcoal canister and the actual brake booster. I don't think you guys can see it, but what you're looking for is a rubber port that looks similar to this steering outlet, but instead of a steering shaft, there's going to be your main engine harness coming out of it. And what you do is you can either poke a hole in it or you can try to fish through the existing hole, but that's how you get your wires from the engine compartment out to the cab. Now, I did a video on wiring a relay into a system at one point that does a much better job of explaining where the port is. I don't want to take too much more time on that now, but you can check the card up in the corner if you have more questions. All right, friends, this is the part where we're going to plan out exactly what we're going to do and what the harness is going to look like. Now, again, I already did a video on wiring a circuit like this, so I'm not going to get into the mechanics of the circuit. I'm going to assume that you know where the wires need to go. Again, if you are curious in why wires go in certain places and what wires go where, check that video up in the corner on how to wire a relay. That's going to be really helpful. This is just how to make a good harness. So this is what your harness has to do. This is what it needs to accomplish. You got your battery, you've got your relay, you got your switch inside the cab, and you have your accessory. In this case, we're assuming 2 lights. I know my drawing is in no way up to electronic schematic standards. I use like half actual terms and half not. The point here is the lights, the power is linked together, and the grounds are linked together. So our battery is going to be over in the bottom left corner of our engine compartment, and then up in that top corner we're going to put our relay. Now, if you remember from our measurements, the total distance along the edge and the top of the engine compartment was 62 inches, but that was 22 inches from the battery to the corner, and then another 40 inches from the corner to the inlet into the cab. So we're gonna have to do, this power here is gonna have to be a 22-inch wire that goes from the power on the battery up to the 30 post on the relay, 22 inches there. All right. An 85 is a body ground. That's gonna be different for everybody, but I am going to leave 12 inches for that body ground and assume that we'll be able to find a body ground in 12 inches. And I'm gonna do that for the light ground as well. We're gonna assume that within maybe 18 inches of the lights we'll be able to find a body ground. Now, 86 has to go along the back of the firewall and then into the cab. Now, we know from our diagram or from our measurements that the back of the engine compartment is going to be the 40 inches, and then I wanted to leave an additional 48 inches inside the cab for Eric to play around with. So this we're going to make, I might round it straight to 80 inches. This is going to be an 80-inch wire going from the 86 post across the back of the engine compartment into the cab to this switch. Now, the last one we need to figure out in the engine bay is 87, which is the power to the lights. That has to go along the back edge of the firewall. That's going to be your 40 inches. And then we decided 54 inches from the firewall to the lights. So we're going to make this an even 90 inches. Yeah, we'll keep it 94 inches. From the 87 post across the back of the firewall, down the edge of the engine compartment to these lights. Now we have our measurements for in the engine compartment. The only thing that's going to be a wild card is the in-cab body ground and the in-cab power supply. Now, you'll know from that video, I recommend using the cigarette lighters as power for the switch on a Jeep, because most Jeeps come with one that's a switch circuit and one that's a constantly powered circuit, so you have your option there, which you want to use. So We're gonna address this one later. For right now, let's get the harness built for inside the cab. All right, now this next step is not something you have to do, but I'm gonna take some masking tape and a silver Sharpie, and I'm gonna label all of the wires we cut. So the first thing we need is a 22-inch power from the battery back to where the relay is gonna go. And we'll label this, it's battery to 30. We'll put this aside for construction. Doing all this pre-cutting and pre-labeling makes it so much easier. Later you can just lay it all out, and all you have to do is cut, crimp, and heat shrink. And then it all comes together real quick. You start losing things if you try to do each step individually. All right, these should be all the wire segments we're going to need. All right, what we need to do now is go through this whole pile and strip about a 1/2 inch of insulation off of each of these wires. All right, now this handy dandy tool right here tells me which hole to use for 14, and that's good. I'll spin her around, pop it off. We're just gonna go through and do this for each end, about a 1/2 inch. All right, next we need to determine which type of connector is gonna go on each piece here. I forgot to mention when I was talking about supplies, you're obviously gonna need some kind of connector to connect this power to your battery. That will differ depending on the size of your battery terminal and the connector and the type of vehicle. I'm gonna leave that one open-ended and let Eric choose what he wants to put on there. But there would be a connector here. At some point we're gonna chop into this for the fuse, obviously, and that will get just wired together with heat shrink. Then up here we're going to need a blade connector. I'm going to put a B. We're going to need a blade connector on this ground. We're going to need a blade connector on 87 and on 86. Then if you follow 86, we're going to need a blade connector on the other end of 86. We're going to need a blade connector on the other side of 87, and we're going to need one on this ground and on this power and on this ground down here. These blade connectors make it much easier to install or take out the harness when you need to. If you just wire everything in hard, first of all, you leave yourself open to things getting disconnected, corroded, broken, but also it's very difficult to remove the harness if you ever need to remove it. All right, we have our 2 boxes of blade connectors. We have our heat shrink. Now for these purposes, I'm actually going to cut each piece of heat shrink in half. We don't need that full long piece. We're just going to go through each wire and put the appropriate blade connector. Obviously there's female and male, and then I've got the exterior ones, the fully shielded ones that I'm going to use in the engine compartment, and the open ones which we're going to use inside the cab. All right, when you're fitting these connectors on, you want to make sure that there's no wire sticking out the bottom. You want this larger piece to cover up the insulation, so you might have to trim some of the wires a little bit. If I could, there we go. So that this guy goes on. Take our crimper. Crimp it down. Take our heat shrink, move it right up and over. Then you take your lighter. You do not want to put the flame directly on the heat shrink. You want the heat shrink to be just above it. And you're going to move it to each side until it's all clamped down. Nice and pretty. This is going to serve 2 purposes. Obviously, it's going to keep everything waterproof. It's going to keep everything neat, and it'll help keep it together a little bit. There we go. That's one perfect connection right there. Move to the other end, do the same thing. All right, we got all of our wires with the connectors on them. They're heat shrunk. They look real pretty. They're set up to last a good long time. Now what we need to do is add in our fuse. Now, you always want the fuse to be as close to the battery as possible. So in this application, I'm literally going to add it onto the end of our terminal 30 to battery cable, and then whatever connector Eric decides to put on the end to connect to the battery will be right here. The fuse will be nice and in line. We're going to strip a little bit of extra off this thing. We're going to take a full piece of heat shrink. I know a lot of people use butt connectors at this point, or they solder. It's not what we're going to do today. We're going to wrap them together and then back on themselves like this. Oh shoot, well, forgot to put the heat shrink on first. There we go. We're going to take them good inch plus on each side. We're just going to wrap it around each other. This is going to make a tight, complete connection. It's not going to break, it's not going to sever, and because of the heat shrink, it is not going to corrode. See that? Nice and pretty. That's going to do the job. Yeah, you can get butt connectors out. I haven't found that you need to. So get that connection right in the middle of your heat shrink. Alrighty, now that we have our fuse wired in, we're going to take it over to a nice wide open area and start laying this thing out to finalize up our harness. Now, believe it or not, this confusing mess of wires here is how it needs to be laid out. So you got your relay right there with the power that's coming down to the battery, with the fuse there. Now you've got your accessory to the switch, as well as your load power to your lights. They're going to run across the back of the firewall, and then they're going to split. The black one's going to go up into the cab. The red one's going to come down the other side to the lights. So what we're going to do is use some split conduit and some electrical tape to kind of merge wires together that are running the same way to organize this so it's not just a big mess of wires. Alright friends, we're done. That's all there is to it. As you can see, we have a nice, neat wire harness. Anywhere where there's two wires, we used split tubing to keep everything organized. You got your relay up there, which can be attached to the firewall now. The line coming down to your battery. Got your body ground right there for the relay. Over on this side, we've got the power and ground for the accessory. And then the only wire running into the cab will be this black one. And then these two will be your power and ground inside the cab. Again, like I said, I like to use a switched or non-switched cigarette lighter there. Once again, if you have any questions on exactly how to wire this circuit or why these wires are going where, we have a video on that. This one was strictly on the process of, you know, putting a nice looking wire harness together, something that's not going to be a rat's nest, the proper way to heat shrink, split tubing, all that good stuff. So if you have any questions on this process, by all means, leave me a comment down in the squawk boxes. Check out those other videos on how to wire up relays. As always, thanks for watching. See you next time. Right, Jude? Say thanks for watching.